My husband got $1 billion and threw me out, but 24 hours later, he was at my door in tears. The silver suitcases by the front door gleamed under the porch light like tombstones marking the death of my marriage. 3 of them, packed with military precision, my clothes folded with the same cold efficiency Marcus had used to fold me out of his life. I stood there on what used to be my doorstep, fumbling with a key that suddenly felt foreign in my hands. The lock had been changed. Of course it had. Marcus Alexander Chin, my husband of 8 years, had thought of everything. Sarah? His voice drifted from inside, smooth as expensive whiskey. Is that you trying to break in? The door swung open before I could respond, and there he stood, 6 feet of newly minted arrogance wrapped in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes. God, his eyes held the kind of cold satisfaction that comes with knowing you've just won the biggest game of your life. Marcus, what is this? I gestured at the suitcases, my voice barely steady. What's happening here? He leaned against the doorframe like he owned the world, which, as of 3 hours ago, he practically did. I'm moving forward, Sarah. Technova Solutions just sold for $1 billion. $1 billion. Can you even comprehend that number? The news hit me like a physical blow. I'd known the sale was coming, had watched him pace the house for weeks, taking calls at all hours, but hearing the final number, it made everything real. And terrifying. That's incredible, Marcus. We did it. We. He laughed, a sound that would have been charming once, but now felt like broken glass in my chest. Sarah, sweetheart, you wouldn't understand the complexities of what just happened. This is big boy business now. Billion-dollar business. I stared at him, searching for some trace of the man I'd married. The man who used to stay up until 3 a.m. debugging code while I brought him coffee and rubbed his shoulders. The man who'd proposed with a ring he'd saved for months to buy, promising we'd build our empire together. Marcus, I helped build Technova. I was there from the beginning. You made coffee and ordered takeout, he interrupted, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that had started creeping in over the past year. And, don't get me wrong, I appreciated the moral support. But this is about real contribution. About vision and execution and, he gestured vaguely at himself, about being the kind of person who belongs in boardrooms with other billionaires. The words hung in the air between us like poison. 8 years of marriage, of partnership, of believing in each other, reduced to coffee runs and moral support. I don't understand, I whispered, and immediately regretted it because his smile widened. Exactly. You don't understand. And that's okay, Sarah. That's why I'm making this easy for you. He nodded toward the suitcases. I've packed your things. There's a check in the front pocket of the middle suitcase, enough to get you started somewhere new. Think of it as severance pay. Severance pay. Like I was an employee he was letting go. Marcus, we're married. You can't just... Actually, I can. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like legal documents. My lawyers have been busy today. Very busy. You'll be hearing from them soon about the divorce proceedings. Don't worry. I'm being generous. Much more generous than I legally have to be. The world tilted sideways. Divorce proceedings? Marcus, this is insane. This morning we had breakfast together. You kissed me goodbye. You said... This morning, I was worth 50 million. Tonight, I'm worth $1 billion. Things change, Sarah. People change. I'm not the same man who married you, and frankly, you're not the same woman I need beside me anymore. He straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd had since college, but there was nothing nervous about him now. He was calculating, methodical, ruthless. I need a partner who can navigate this new world with me. Someone who understands private jets and charity galas and what it means to have real power. Someone who looks the part. His eyes swept over me dismissively, taking in my jeans and old NYU sweatshirt. Someone who fits. The cruelty of it stole my breath. So you're trading me in? Like I'm a used car that doesn't match your new success? Don't be dramatic. I'm setting you free. You can find someone more appropriate for your station. Someone who appreciates your domestic skills. Domestic skills. The phrase hit like a slap. This from the man who'd begged me to quit my job at Google to help him launch his startup. Who'd promised that we were partners, that every success would be ours together. I gave up everything for you, I said quietly. My career, my opportunities, and I'm grateful. Truly. But that was then, and this is now. He glanced at his Rolex, new, I noticed. Everything about him was new except his cruelty, which had apparently been there all along, just waiting for enough money to let it breathe. The car service will be here in 10 minutes to take you wherever you want to go. I'd suggest your sister's place. Karen always liked you better than I did anyway. The casual mention of my sister's name, the assumption that he'd already planned out my exile, the complete certainty that I would simply accept this, it was too much. You bastard, I breathed. Careful, Sarah. My lawyers advised me to document everything tonight. For the divorce proceedings. He held up his phone and I realized he'd been recording. We wouldn't want any emotional outbursts to complicate things, would we? Even now, even while destroying me, he was thinking 3 moves ahead. That strategic mind that had built Technova was now focused entirely on erasing me from his life as efficiently as possible. The headlights of a black sedan swept across our driveway, my former driveway, and Marcus smiled his billion-dollar smile. Your ride's here. Time to go, Sarah. Time for both of us to start our new lives. I looked at him one last time, memorizing his face, trying to understand how someone could change so completely in the span of a few hours. But maybe he hadn't changed at all. Maybe this was who he'd always been, and I'd just been too useful, too convenient, too loving to see it. I grabbed the handle of the nearest suitcase, my hand shaking with rage and shock, and something that felt dangerously close to despair. You know what, Marcus? You're right. This is the beginning of something new. I met his eyes, letting him see every ounce of hurt and fury I felt. And I hope you enjoy every single second of your billion-dollar life. Because something tells me you're going to remember this moment for a very long time. He laughed as I loaded my suitcases into the sedan, as I gave the driver my sister's address, as I disappeared into the night like an inconvenient memory being deleted. But as the car pulled away from the house we'd bought together, painted together, dreamed together in, I caught sight of his reflection in the window. For just a moment, his confident smile flickered, and I saw something that looked almost like uncertainty, almost like fear. But then the moment passed, and we drove into the darkness, leaving Marcus Alexanderchin alone in his billion-dollar palace, convinced he'd just made the smartest move of his life. He had no idea how wrong he was. He had no idea that in exactly 24 hours, he'd be standing at a very different door, tears streaming down his face, begging for the one thing his $1 billion couldn't buy: forgiveness. And my signature. Karen's guest room smelled like lavender and disappointment. I'd been staring at the ceiling for 6 hours, replaying every moment of Marcus's betrayal when the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds. My sister had held me while I cried, fed me ice cream, and called Marcus every name in the book. But now, in the quiet morning light, something else was stirring inside me. Not just hurt, not just rage, memory. I sat up, reached for my laptop, one of the few things Marcus had bothered to pack, and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Technova, early development. The files looked ancient now, dating back to 2016 when we were working out of our cramped studio apartment, surviving on ramen noodles and dreams. God, we were so young then. So broke. So desperately in love with the idea of building something together. I clicked on a file labeled Core Algorithm, Draft 1, and felt my breath catch. There it was, in black and white, the original code that would eventually become Technova's revolutionary inventory management system. The system that had just sold for $1 billion. My code. I scrolled through line after line, each one bringing back memories of late nights hunched over my laptop while Marcus paced behind me, throwing out ideas that I somehow managed to translate into working software. He was the visionary, the salesman, the face of the company. But I I was the one who made his visions actually work. Sarah, can you make the system predict inventory needs 3 months out instead of just 1? He'd asked during our second month of development. Theoretically, yes, I'd replied, already mentally mapping the machine learning framework I'd need to build. Give me 2 weeks. I'd given him 2 weeks of 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and his proud smile when I finally cracked the algorithm that would become Technova's signature feature. The feature that had attracted our first major client. The feature that had started everything. But Marcus was right about one thing. We'd been too broke for proper legal paperwork back then. When we'd filed the initial patents and trademarks, we'd done everything ourselves using online legal forms and YouTube tutorials. I remembered that night clearly now, both of us sitting on our second-hand couch, arguing about whose name should go first on the documents. Put yours first, Marcus had insisted. You wrote most of the code. It's only fair. No, it's your company, your vision, I'd protested. Your name should be first. We'd compromised alphabetically. Sarah Chin first, then Marcus Chin. I'd kept my maiden name for professional reasons back then, which meant my name appeared on everything before his. At the time, it had felt romantic. 2 names intertwined on legal documents, like our futures were intertwined forever. Marcus had laughed about it later, especially as the company grew and lawyers started asking questions. It's just a technicality, he'd say whenever anyone brought it up. Sarah's my wife. What's mine is hers. What's hers is mine, right? I'd always nodded and smiled, never bothering to correct the assumption that everything automatically belonged to him. We were a team. Partners. What did it matter whose name was technically on the paperwork? Now, sitting in my sister's guest room with my marriage in ruins, I realized exactly how much it mattered. I pulled up the patent database and searched for Technova's core technologies. There they were, all 15 patents that formed the backbone of the billion-dollar sale. And there, listed as the primary inventor on 12 of them, was my name, Sarah Mitchell Chin. My maiden name, which I'd kept for professional consistency. The name that legally distinguished me from my husband in ways I'd never even considered. I scrolled through trademark filings, copyright registrations, even the original source code repositories. My digital fingerprints were everywhere, stamped into the legal DNA of the company that Marcus had just sold. The company he'd just sold without my permission. The irony was breathtaking. In his eagerness to erase me from his new life, Marcus had apparently forgotten that I was woven into the very fabric of his old one. The technical foundation of his empire wasn't just built by me, according to the legal system. It was owned by me. I opened my email for the first time since last night and found 17 messages from Marcus, starting demanding and growing increasingly frantic. Sarah, we need to talk about some paperwork irregularities. Sarah, please call me back. There are some legal issues we need to resolve. Sarah, answer your fucking phone. I smiled for the first time in 12 hours. Legal issues. Paperwork irregularities. Such clinical terms for what was probably the most expensive mistake in corporate history. The last email had arrived just 20 minutes ago. Sarah, I know you're upset, but we can work this out. Please. The buyers are asking questions. Call me. The buyers were asking questions. Of course they were. Any competent legal team would have done a thorough intellectual property audit before transferring $1 billion. They would have discovered what Marcus had somehow forgotten in his rush to reshape his life. That the woman he'd thrown out like garbage legally owned the very thing he'd just promised to sell. I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen, where Karen was making coffee with the kind of aggressive clattering that meant she was furious on my behalf. How are you feeling? She asked gently. Like I'm about to get a very interesting phone call. I replied. As if on cue, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since I'd known him, I let it go to voicemail. But I was smiling as it rang, because I'd just remembered something Marcus had apparently forgotten in his billion-dollar euphoria. I wasn't just his discarded wife. I was his business partner. And partners don't get fired, they get bought out. The call came at 2:17 p.m., just as I was finishing a grilled cheese sandwich that tasted like victory. But it wasn't Marcus's name on my screen. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a caller ID that made my heart skip. Whitfield and Associates. Marcus's lawyers. I let it ring twice before answering, savoring the moment. Sarah Chin speaking, I said, making sure my voice sounded calm and professional. Miss Chin, this is David Whitfield from Whitfield and Associates. I represent your husband in the Technova transaction. The man's voice was tight, with barely controlled panic. We have an urgent situation that requires your immediate attention. Oh. I leaned back in Karen's kitchen chair, watching a bird build its nest outside the window. Such perfect timing. Even nature was rebuilding while my old life crumbled. What kind of situation? There appears to be some complications with the intellectual property transfer. Our clients at Meridian Capital are requesting clarification on certain ownership structures before they can complete the wire transfer. Meridian Capital, the buyers who were supposed to make Marcus a billionaire. I'd heard him mention them dozens of times over the past few months, always with the kind of reverence people reserve for deities. Complications? I asked innocently. What kind of complications? The pause that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. When Whitfield finally spoke, his voice had taken on the tone lawyers use when they're about to deliver very expensive bad news. Miss Chen, according to our investigation, your name appears as the primary patent holder on 12 of the 15 core technologies that comprise Technova's intellectual property portfolio. Additionally, you're listed as the original author on approximately 78% of the company's proprietary source code. I took a sip of Karen's coffee, letting the silence stretch. Is that a problem? Another pause. Well, yes. You see, without your explicit written consent, Mr. Chin cannot legally transfer ownership of these assets to Meridian Capital. The sale agreement specifically states that all intellectual property must be unencumbered and freely transferable. I see. I was actually enjoying this conversation more than I should have been. And what happens if these assets can't be transferred? The deal collapses, Whitfield said bluntly. All of it. Meridian has made it clear that they're purchasing Technova for its proprietary technology, not its brand or customer base. Without clear title to the IP, there's no transaction. No transaction. No $1 billion. No new life for Marcus built on the ashes of our marriage. Miss Chen, are you still there? Oh yes, I'm here. Just processing this information. It's all very technical, isn't it? The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had spent last night condescendingly explaining that I wouldn't understand the complexities of his business world. Now his lawyers were calling me because I understood those complexities better than he did. Miss Chen, I need to ask, were you aware of your ownership stake in these technologies? I wrote the code, Mr. Whitfield. Of course I was aware. I stood and walked to the window, watching that bird continue its methodical nest building. Is there something specific you need from me? We need your signature on a series of documents transferring your ownership rights to Mr. Chen, effective immediately. This would clear the way for the Meridian transaction to proceed as planned. And if I don't sign? The silence that followed was deafening. Miss Chen, I'm sure you understand the delicate nature of this situation. Mr. Chen is prepared to offer you fair compensation for your cooperation. Fair compensation. From the man who'd offered me severance pay like a dismissed secretary just 24 hours ago. What kind of compensation are we talking about? $2 million. Cash. Wired to your account within 24 hours of signing. $2 million out of $1 billion. Less than 0.25%. Even by Marcus's standards, it was insulting. That's very generous, I said, making sure my sarcasm was subtle enough that it could be plausible deniability later. But I'll need some time to consider this. It's a big decision. Miss Chen, I must stress the urgency of this matter. Meridian has given us until tomorrow at close of business to resolve this issue, or they're withdrawing their offer entirely. Tomorrow at close of business, I repeated thoughtfully. That doesn't give me much time to consult with my own legal counsel, does it? Another long pause. Whitfield was clearly realizing that the grieving wife he'd expected to steamroll was going to be more complicated than anticipated. Perhaps we could arrange an emergency meeting today? Mr. Chun is very eager to resolve this amicably. I'll bet he is, I thought. Out loud, I said, I'm sure he is. But like I said, I need time to think. This is all very sudden, and yesterday was a difficult day for me personally. Of course, Ms. Chun. We understand this timing is challenging given your personal circumstances. Personal circumstances. Such a delicate way to describe having your husband throw you out like garbage. I appreciate your understanding, Mr. Whitfield. I'll be in touch. I hung up before he could respond and immediately called the one person I knew could help me navigate what was about to become the most important negotiation of my life. Jessica Huang, attorney at law, came the crisp voice of my old roommate from law school, who'd made partner at one of the city's most prestigious firms while I was playing supportive wife. Jess, it's Sarah. Sarah Chun. I need help, and I think you're going to find this case very interesting. Sarah, I heard about Marcus's big sale. Congratulations. Wait, why do you sound like you're about to declare a fight? I looked at my reflection in Karen's window and barely recognized the woman staring back. 24 hours ago, I'd been a discarded wife with 3 suitcases and a broken heart. Now I was a woman who owned $1 billion company and was just starting to understand what that meant. Because I am Jess. And I'm going to need the best damn lawyer I know to help me win it. The knock came at 9:47 p.m., 3 sharp raps that echoed through Karen's quiet house like gunshots. I knew it was him before I even looked through the peephole. There was something desperate about the rhythm, something that screamed of a man whose perfect world had just collapsed in the span of 24 hours. Marcus stood on my sister's porch, and he looked like hell. Gone was the pristine Tom Ford suit from last night. Instead, he wore wrinkled khakis and a dress shirt that looked like he'd slept in it, which, knowing Marcus's obsession with appearances, meant he probably hadn't slept at all. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, sticking up at odd angles like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. There were dark circles under his eyes, and when he looked up at the peephole, I could see something I'd never seen before in 8 years of marriage. Fear. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. Sarah. His voice cracked on my name like he was a teenager again. Thank God. We need to talk. Do we? I leaned against the doorframe, studying him. Even in his panic, he was still handsome, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of sharp features that had made me fall in love with him in college. But now I could see the cracks in that perfect facade. The sweat staining his expensive shirt. The tremor in his hands. The way he kept licking his lips like his mouth had gone completely dry. Sarah, please. This is a nightmare. You have to help me fix this. Fix what, exactly? He laughed, but it came out as more of a sob. You know what? The lawyers, the patents, the whole fucking mess. Meridian is threatening to walk away from the entire deal. Do you know what that means? It means you're not a billionaire anymore, I said calmly. It means I'm ruined. The words exploded out of him. I already spent money I don't have. I bought a penthouse in Manhattan, put a deposit on a yacht, hired a private jet for next month. I told everyone, Sarah. Everyone knows about the $1 billion sale. If this falls through. He trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. Marcus had always cared more about appearances than substance. The idea of being publicly humiliated, of having to explain why his $1 billion deal had collapsed, would be worse than losing the money itself. You forgot about me, I said quietly. What? Last night, you threw me out like garbage. You told me I wouldn't understand your big boy business. You said I was just coffee and moral support. I stepped closer, and he actually flinched. But you forgot something important, Marcus. You forgot that I'm not just your discarded wife. I'm your business partner. I built Technova with you, line by line, patent by patent. And apparently, I own most of it. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, then something that looked almost like panic. Sarah, that's just paperwork. You know that. We were married when we filed those patents. Community property laws. Don't. I held up a hand, and he fell silent immediately. Don't you dare try to lawyer me right now. We both know the truth. I kept my maiden name for professional reasons, which means legally, I'm a separate entity from you. Those patents, those copyrights, that source code, they're mine. Not ours. Mine. He was quiet for a long moment, processing this. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, defeated. What do you want? What do I want? I laughed, and it felt good. 12 hours ago, you would have known what I wanted. I wanted my husband to remember that we were supposed to be partners. I wanted him to share his success instead of trading me in for a newer model. But now, I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the confident billionaire from last night, but a frightened man who just realized he'd thrown away the one person who could save him. Now I want you to admit that you forgot. I want you to say it out loud. Sarah, come on. Say it. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were wet with tears he was trying desperately not to shed. I forgot, he whispered. I forgot about the patents. I forgot that your name was on everything. I forgot that you built this company as much as I did. I was so excited about the money, about what it would mean for my future, that I forgot. I forgot you made it all possible. There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. But instead of satisfaction, I felt something else entirely. Pity. Sit down, Marcus. He collapsed onto Karen's porch steps like a marionette whose strings had been cut. I can fix this, he said desperately. I'll give you 10 million. 15. 20. Name your price, Sarah. Just sign the transfer documents. 20 million. Last night, he'd offered me 2. Tonight, the price had jumped to 20. By tomorrow, who knew how high it might go? But I wasn't the same woman who'd left his house in tears 24 hours ago. It's not about the money anymore, Marcus. Then what? What do you want? I looked down at him sitting on those steps, this man who'd been so certain he could erase me from his life, and smiled. I want to go to that boardroom meeting tomorrow, the one with Meridian Capital. His head snapped up. What? You heard me. I want to be there when you explain to your buyers why their billion-dollar deal is on hold. I want to sit at that big table in your fancy conference room and remind everyone exactly who built the technology they're trying to buy. Sarah, no. You can't. This is business and I own the business. I finished. So I'll be there, Marcus. Whether you like it or not. I turned to go back inside, then paused. Oh, and Marcus? Next time you want to throw someone out of your life, you might want to make sure they're not the one holding all the keys. I closed the door, leaving him sitting on those steps in the darkness, finally understanding the true cost of his betrayal. And this was just the beginning. The 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower felt like walking into the future, all glass and steel and the kind of understated wealth that whispered instead of shouted. I'd been in Marcus's office before, of course, but never like this. Never as an equal. Never holding cards that could make or break billion-dollar dreams. Jessica walked beside me, her confidence infectious. She'd spent all night preparing, armed with patent documents, ownership certificates, and a legal strategy that would have made Sun Tzu proud. My old roommate had transformed into a corporate warrior, and I'd never been more grateful for our friendship. Remember, she murmured as we approached the conference room, you're not here to be nice. You're here to get what you deserve. The boardroom was exactly what I'd expected. A monument to masculine power with its massive mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. But today it felt different. Today, it felt like my arena. Marcus was already there, flanked by his usual army of suits. David Whitfield sat to his right, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in 2 days. But it was the 3 people at the far end of the table who commanded attention, the Meridian Capital team. Catherine Meridian herself was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with silver hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that radiated from across the room. Her 2 associates looked like they'd stepped out of a Forbes cover story, polished, powerful, and utterly unimpressed by the chaos they'd walked into. Miss Chun, Catherine stood as I entered, extending her hand with a smile that revealed nothing. I understand you're the missing piece of our puzzle. One of the pieces, I corrected, accepting her handshake. But apparently a rather important one. Marcus's face had gone pale the moment I walked in. He'd probably spent the morning hoping I'd change my mind, that I'd take his money and disappear quietly into whatever life discarded wives were supposed to live. I took the seat directly across from him, Jessica settling beside me like a predator choosing her hunting ground. "Well," Catherine said, returning to her chair, "this is certainly unprecedented. In 30 years of acquisitions, I've never had a deal stall because the seller forgot to check who actually owned what he was selling." Marcus flinched at the word "forgot," and I felt a small, dark satisfaction. "Perhaps we should discuss how we can resolve this situation," Whitfield interjected, his voice strained with false optimism. "Ms. Chun has indicated she's willing to transfer her ownership stake for appropriate compensation." "Have I?" I asked mildly. I don't recall saying that. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Marcus's heart hammering from across the table. "Miss Chun." Catherine leaned forward, studying me with new interest. "What exactly are you proposing?" I opened the folder Jessica had prepared and slid a document across the table to Catherine, then another to Marcus. I watched his face as he read, saw the exact moment he realized what I was doing. "Those are my terms," I said simply. Marcus's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "Sarah, you can't be serious." 40% equity in the new merged entity, Catherine read aloud, her eyebrows rising. "A seat on the board of directors, with full voting rights. Recognition as co-founder and chief technology officer of the combined company. And..." She paused, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "A formal public acknowledgement of your role in developing Technova's core technologies." "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice cracking, "this is insane. You're asking for..." "What I earned," I interrupted. "What I built. What I legally own." I met his eyes across the table. "What you tried to steal from me when you decided I wasn't worth remembering." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 42 floors below. Catherine and her team exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless language of people who'd made hundreds of deals together. "These terms are substantial," one of Catherine's associates said carefully. "So is the technology one created," I replied. "Without my patents, without my source code, you're not buying a billion-dollar company. You're buying an empty shell with a good marketing department." Marcus's face had gone from pale to red, the way it always did when he was about to lose his temper. "Sarah, this is my company. I built this from nothing. I took all the risks, made all the sacrifices. We built this," I said firmly, "and the legal system agrees with me. Those patents don't lie, Marcus. That source code doesn't lie. 12 of 15 core technologies belong to me. 78% of the original codebase was written by me. The machine learning algorithms that make your inventory system special? Mine. The predictive analytics that attracted your first major client? Mine. The entire foundation of your billion-dollar valuation? Mine." Each word hit him like a physical blow. I could see him deflating, the reality of his situation finally, truly sinking in. Catherine leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Chun, is what Ms. Chun is saying accurate?" Marcus looked around the room like a cornered animal, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. His lawyers had probably already confirmed everything I'd said. His technical team would have verified the source code ownership. There was nowhere left to run. "Yes," he said finally, the word barely audible. "Then it seems we have a decision to make," Catherine said. "We can either accept Ms. Chen's terms and proceed with a modified deal structure, or we can walk away and forfeit our entire investment in this acquisition." She turned to me, her smile sharp as a blade. "Ms. Chen, I have to ask, why these specific terms? Why not just take a cash payout and walk away?" I thought about Marcus throwing me out like garbage, about him telling me I wouldn't understand his big boy business, about 8 years of being treated like a supporting character in my own life story. Because, Ms. Meridian, for too long I've been invisible in my own success story. I want the world to know exactly who built the technology you're buying. I want my name on the patents to mean something. I want every tech conference, every industry publication, every business school case study to remember that some of the most innovative software of the past decade was created by a woman who was almost erased from history. I looked directly at Marcus, letting him see every ounce of determination in my eyes. And I want to make sure that never happens to anyone else. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, then she started to laugh. Not mockingly, but with genuine appreciation. Miss Chun, I think this is going to be the beginning of a very interesting partnership. Marcus buried his face in his hands, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized he finally understood. He hadn't just lost a wife. He'd lost control of his own company, and there was nothing left to do but sign. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Gold-plated, expensive, the kind of instrument designed for signing documents that change lives forever. Catherine had placed it deliberately in the center of the mahogany table, where everyone could see it, where its significance couldn't be ignored. Marcus stared at it like it was a loaded gun. The modified agreement reflects Ms. Chen's terms, Jessica announced, distributing copies of the new contract. 40% equity stake in the merged entity, board position, CTO title, and full public recognition of her contributions to Technova's core technologies. I watched Marcus scan the document, his face cycling through emotions like a broken kaleidoscope. Disbelief.
Rage. Defeat.
And underneath it all, something that looked suspiciously like the dawning realization that he brought this entirely on himself. This isn't how this was supposed to go, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. No, I agreed quietly. It was supposed to go with you getting $1 billion and me disappearing quietly into whatever corner of the world discarded wives are supposed to inhabit. But you made one small mistake, Marcus. His eyes met mine across the table. What mistake? You forgot that the woman you were discarding was the same woman who made your empire possible in the first place. Catherine cleared her throat diplomatically. Gentlemen, ladies, we need signatures on all copies within the next hour if we want to complete the wire transfer today. The markets close in 3 hours, and my board is expecting confirmation of this acquisition. Marcus picked up the pen with shaking hands. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, might storm out, and let the whole deal collapse rather than admit what he'd lost. But then he looked around the room, at the lawyers who were charging him by the minute, at the Meridian team who were barely concealing their impatience, at his own board members who were probably calculating how much money his pride was about to cost them. He signed his name with sharp, angry strokes, each letter a small act of violence against his own ego. Excellent, Catherine said, taking the document and adding her own signature with practiced efficiency. Ms. Chun. I accepted the pen from Marcus, our fingers brushing for just a moment. His hand was cold, trembling slightly. Mine was steady as a surgeon's. I thought about the young woman who'd helped build Technova from nothing, who'd stayed up until dawn debugging code, while Marcus slept. I thought about all the patents I'd filed, all the algorithms I'd created, all the innovations that had been attributed to the team, while I smiled supportively from the sidelines. I thought about the wife who'd been thrown out like garbage, told she wouldn't understand the complexities of billion-dollar business. And then I signed my name, Sarah Mitchell Chun, in bold, clear letters that would soon be printed on business cards, letterhead, and press releases. Letters that would ensure I was never invisible again. The moment the ink dried, everything changed. Catherine's assistant immediately began making calls, setting in motion the complex machinery of corporate acquisition. Wire transfers, press releases, regulatory filings. The business world shifted to accommodate the new reality we'd just created. Marcus slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. 600 million, he said hollowly. I just went from $1 billion to 600 million in 2 days. You went from $1 billion to 600 million in 2 minutes, I corrected. The 2 days were just how long it took you to realize what you'd thrown away. But even as I said it, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, though there was that. Not revenge, though there was that too. What I felt was something deeper, more lasting. Freedom. Freedom from being defined by someone else's success. Freedom from being grateful for crumbs from a table I'd helped build. Freedom from the woman who'd accepted moral support as a job description when she deserved so much more. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Saw the press release.
Holy shit, Sarah.
Holy shit. The press release. Of course. Within minutes, the business world would know that Technova's billion-dollar acquisition had been completed with an unexpected twist. The revelation that the company's core technologies had been created by Sarah Mitchell Chin, who is now CTO and major stakeholder in the merged entity. My phone buzzed again. Then again. Reporters, old colleagues, headhunters who suddenly remembered my name. The invisible woman was about to become very visible indeed. Marcus was staring out the window at the city below, his empire spread out beneath him, but no longer entirely his. "You know what the worst part is?" he said without looking at me. "What?" "You were always smarter than me, even in college. I just convinced myself that because I was better at talking to people, at selling ideas, that made me the valuable one." He finally turned to meet my eyes. I should have remembered that talking and selling don't mean anything without something real to sell. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. I stood, smoothing my skirt, preparing to leave the boardroom where I'd just reclaimed my life. "Marcus. Yeah. Next time you want to build an empire, remember who's holding the blueprints." I walked toward the door, Jessica at my side, leaving behind the man who'd tried to erase me and the marriage that had defined me for too long. 24 hours ago, I'd been a discarded wife with 3 suitcases and a broken heart. Now I was Sarah Mitchell Chin, CTO of a billion-dollar company, board member, and a woman who would never again let anyone make her invisible. As the elevator descended from the 42nd floor, carrying me away from Marcus's world and toward my own future, I realized something important. I hadn't just saved his deal. I had saved myself. And that signature, bold, clear, and absolutely mine, was proof that some stories don't end with the woman walking away. Sometimes, they end with her walking into exactly where she was always meant to be, at the head of the table.